Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and today I'm at the 2019 Pacific Northwest Writers Conference in Seattle, Washington, with the fabulous Donald Maass, author of The Emotional Craft of Fiction. Donald, welcome to Author.
Good to see you, Bill.
So, Don, one thing I know about you is that you've kind of traveled through the entire publishing world, from editing to ghostwriting to fiction writing to agenting to the stuff you're doing now with teaching. Mm-hmm. It started though with, did it start with editing? Was that kind of how you're first into the publishing world?
Well, the very first thing I ever did in book publishing, I was a student in London, and one of my teachers happened to be the editorial director of Glance, the British publisher at the time. So first thing I ever did was write a reader's report. It was so valuable to do that. I mean, you read so much, you learn so much from manuscripts that aren't edited, aren't polished or published yet. You know, they're very instructive, but I also learned to do analysis on the fly. I learned some tricks about that, like you write down all the characters' names as you encounter them, so you have a character list, key locations and words, so you don't have to scroll back, or back in those days, flip back in the paper manuscript to refresh your memory. So even today, with all the thinking I've done and work I've done for I don't know on how many books over the years, I only have to read the manuscript once. And I can break it down, I can analyze it, I have things to say or suggest about it immediately, and it's been, it taught me efficiency in reading.
Yeah. What's interesting is we're going to get to it, but you were in a way becoming a teacher, even in a way, at that point. Because part of the teacher is to help people, is to be able to break down for things so people can understand an abstract concept maybe, so they can see it, so they can make sense of it, so they can use it. Right. And that's kind of what you were doing by trying to understand why the query letter wasn't working, why the plot wasn't working, just for your own self, yeah?
Right, yeah, absolutely. and I like to do that analysis. We get, as a literary agency, which is a big part of my life, we submit, I can't imagine how many submissions we make a year, and we get, people paper their walls with rejections or have drawers full of rejections. Well, my agency, we have truckloads, over the years, and we're kind of inured to it. It doesn't, I don't have any ego invested in it, so it's easy, but those rejections that come from editors at big publishing companies are often not very diagnostic or instructive, right. Or they don't really point you. They say things like, I didn't really connect with the characters, or I didn't feel as involved as I wanted to feel, or whatever. And those are legitimate responses to something that somebody's read, but it just doesn't tell you anything specific or useful. So my practice has always been to try to understand why this isn't working and to articulate it at least a little bit for somebody who's getting a response from me.
Of course, it is true, and I have writer friends who, one of my good writer friends who wrote a book that did very well in the New York Times bestseller list that was rejected, and the editor's just like, I don't get it, this doesn't make any sense to me, and then the editor did get it, they sold 100,000 copies or whatever. And I don't want to suggest, though, that it is all just subjective, which is part of the reason, part of the way you got into teaching.
Yes.
Most famously for writing the Breakout Novel. Was it the book or not? It was the novel, writing the Breakout Novel. And that was the first of what is many books and a lot of teaching and a lot of workshops.
Yeah.
And that is part of your attempt to help ground writers in some fundamentals they can all use, regardless of what they're writing. Is that a fair?
Well, yes, there are fundamentals about story which are more or less universal, although every rule is made to be broken.
Right.
But what I really try to do is to analyze that which seems magical or mysterious in fiction, to take the things that are hard to explain and hard to teach and understand, find the vocabulary for, or even invent the vocabulary for, and then teach that. For instance, I think it was in writing the Breakout Novel, or maybe the next book of mine called The Fire in Fiction, in which I wanted to know, why do we keep reading, page after page, reading closely, with rapt attention when there's very little happening in plot terms? What is it? What's going on there? And so as I delved into it, I realized, oh, this is what's happening. There's always some kind of tension, even if it's not plot tension, happening. Tension between two people talking, or tension inside a character. So I invented the term microtension. you know, just to put a label on it.
Right.
That term has sort of entered, you know, common
Oh, it
parlance.
has? Oh, congratulations.
Well, I think it has, and I get no credit either, by the way.
No, of course not.
But that's okay. The point is that there is something about fiction that works, and it explains things that are hard to understand, like why do some quiet literary novels turn into bestsellers when you expect that only fast-moving thrillers will do so? What's going on that causes us to read so intently? Well, it's one of the things, there are many things, but one of them is microtension.
It's awesome. And so you must enjoy that analytic process.
Yes, yeah, the analytical part is fun, but I'm just curious about things. I mean, I'm curious about economics, I'm curious about how the financial system works, I mean, what really gets people elected, and, you know, all kinds of things. It's, I, you know, love understanding things. It came from my childhood. My dad was a electrical engineer who became a salesman. He sold, back in the day, electric motors.
Okay.
Motors, okay, fine. But he sold them to factories back when there was still manufacturing in the United States. And he would travel around and he'd go visit, you know, the buyers for different manufacturers. And they would give him tours of factories. And so he found out how tires were made, how breakfast cereal was made, and all kinds of things.
Did he tell you about this?
Yeah, he would come home and he would explain how puffed rice is made, for instance. It was so interesting, and I don't know, for some reason that kind of wired my brain in a way to want to know, how does it work?
The first time I encountered you was at this writers' conference years ago, and you might have been teaching the Breakout Novel. I think you were.
Very possibly.
And you said something that I remember to this day, which is that you said, two things. One is, if I hire you, if I take you on as my client, it's your career I want, not your book.
Yes.
Which I thought was really useful for me as a young writer. It was very helpful to know.
Yep.
And the other thing, which I still believe is true, even though bookstores are different, things have changed, which is a bestseller is made when someone takes someone else by the hand, brings them across and says, you've got to read this book. That the bestseller is made by that ultimately it's made by word of mouth.
That is,
do you still
yes.
feel that's the case?
There's science to back me up on that. As a matter of fact, there have been, you know, many studies by the Book Industry Study Group and others to, you know, why does fiction sell? What are consumers responding to? 2/3 of fiction sales are branded sales. In other words, fans of a given author buying more.
But it had to be a first one at some point.
Exactly. So what's interesting for us is, okay, debut novel, what causes people to, well, there are two things. There are two factors that are tied, as a matter of fact. One is front of store display, like those tables.
Right, and that's something you can do.
Well, that's something
spend
publishers
money on.
can pay for.
Right.
And so that can be bought to some extent. But the other thing that's tied with that is word of mouth, and that is not something you can buy. It's not something you can engineer or force to happen. Right. That is only enthusiastic readers spreading the word, as it were. It's all the rest of the reasons that people become aware of books or get interested in books or want to buy books are tiny little slivers of the rationale.
Right.
Social media, which a lot of authors focus on, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
What's your
and stuff.
take? Does it? I'm of the inclination to believe it doesn't matter much, or not as much as people want to believe it matters.
Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and those things do the same thing that book tours and readings and stuff like that used to do. It doesn't sell, it doesn't win over new fans, it doesn't sell books actually. What it does is create a connection between writer and fan.
Right.
It's fan cultivation, really. It's a maintenance thing.
And your hope is those fans will then go to some other people. Hopefully, those people will go to other people.
And they do. So yeah, sure. Connecting to your readers is not wrong. What it doesn't do is create an audience in and of itself. There's only one thing that really does that, and that's the fiction itself.
So, one more question for you. And I want you to think about your own writing, because you've been writing your whole life too, in all different forms. And so, just finish this sentence for me. If writing has taught you anything, it's taught you what?
If writing has taught me anything, it has taught me that you can say more with fewer words.